The boardroom fell silent the moment the security guards stepped toward me. "Mr. Adrian Shaw," the chairman said without meeting my eyes, "please surrender your company badge." The plastic card landed on the polished conference table with a hollow click. No one moved. No one spoke. For 11 years, I had kept Hawthorne Logistics alive through bankrupt suppliers, labor strikes, lawsuits, and economic crashes. I had negotiated contracts at midnight, slept in airport lounges, and stood between this family business and disaster more times than I could remember. Now they watched me as though I were the disaster. Across the table, my younger cousin, Ethan, leaned back comfortably in the chairman's seat. "You've become emotional lately," he said with a faint smile. "The company needs younger leadership." I looked around the room. Executives avoided my gaze. Some looked guilty. Most simply looked relieved. The chairman finally raised his head. "You've always been loyal to this family." Family. The word almost made me laugh. "If you're asking me to resign," I said quietly, "say it directly." He folded his hands. "We've already voted." A folder slid toward me. Termination. Immediate effect. No severance. Confidentiality agreement. Permanent removal from all company affairs. Ethan smiled wider. "You should sign while everyone is still being respectful." Respectful. That was what they called stripping a man of everything he'd built. I flipped through the pages without hurry. Then I picked up the pen. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. "You aren't going to argue?" someone whispered. "No." "You aren't going to defend yourself?" I signed my name. One page, then another, then the last. The scratching of the pen echoed through the room. When I placed it down, Ethan looked almost disappointed. "I expected more." "So did I replied. His smile stiffened. I stood, removed the company pin from my jacket, and placed it beside my badge. "It belongs to Hawthorne Logistics." I looked at every face around the table. "It never belonged to any of you." Without another word, I walked toward the door. Behind me, someone muttered, "He'll come back." Another answered, "He always does." They believed I couldn't leave, because every crisis for the past decade had ended the same way. Adrian fixed it. The factory fire. Adrian, the customs investigation. Adrian, the dockworkers' strike. Adrian, the cyber attack. Adrian. Whenever the family made reckless decisions, I stayed awake for days cleaning the mess. They had mistaken my loyalty for dependence. The elevator doors closed. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't responsible anymore. Rain covered the city in gray sheets. I stood outside headquarters holding only one cardboard archive box. Family photos, a coffee mug, several notebooks. Nothing else. My phone vibrated. "Chairman." I declined. It rang again. Declined. Again. Again. Finally, a message appeared. "You'll cool down. Come to dinner tonight. We'll discuss your future." My future. After firing me, I deleted the message. A black sedan stopped beside the sidewalk. The driver rolled down the window. "Mr. Shaw?" "Yes." "Miss Eleanor Grant sent me." I frowned. "I didn't ask for a car." "She said you wouldn't." I hesitated before opening the rear door. Inside sat Eleanor, the company's retired legal advisor. Her silver hair framed a calm face that rarely betrayed emotion. She studied me for several seconds. "You signed." "I did." "You surprised them. They expected me to beg." She nodded. "They've forgotten who you are." "I know exactly who I am." "No," she said softly. "They've forgotten." The car pulled away from the building. Neither of us spoke for several blocks. Finally, she handed me a sealed envelope. "I was told to give you this only after you left Hawthorne." "By whom?" She didn't answer immediately. "Your father." My breathing stopped. "My father died 14 years ago." So everyone believed. The envelope suddenly felt heavier. His handwriting covered the front. "To Adrian. Open only after you stop carrying everyone else's burdens." I stared without opening it. Eleanor watched quietly. "He left more than memories." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, looking out the window, "the truth your family buried has finally caught up with them." A chill ran through me. My father had died in what everyone called an unavoidable shipping accident. The investigation had ended within weeks. No suspects. No negligence. No questions. I had accepted it. Because I had trusted my family. Eleanor finally looked back. Don't save them this time. The words lingered long after the car disappeared into the traffic. For the first time, I wondered whether everything I believed about my family had been a carefully constructed L.I.M.Y apartment felt unfamiliar without the constant vibration of work. No emergency calls, no frantic emails, no executives demanding impossible solutions. The silence should have been peaceful. Instead, it pressed against my chest. The unopened envelope rested on the dining table. I circled it twice before finally sitting down. The paper had yellowed with age. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Steady, confident, patient. I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small brass key. The first sentence made my hands tremble. If you're reading this, they finally convinced you that sacrificing yourself was your duty. I swallowed hard. He knew. Years before his death, he had already seen the path my life would take. I continued reading. Loyalty without truth becomes slavery. I hope you never spend your life paying debts you never owed. Every line felt as though he were speaking directly across time. Then I reached the final paragraph. There is evidence hidden in Vault 317 at Ashton Trust Bank. Do not open it unless you are no longer protecting the Hawthorne family. When you read what is inside, never seek revenge. Simply stop saving those who buried the truth. Their choices will finish what mine could not. I read the paragraph 3 times. My heartbeat echoed in the quiet apartment. A knock interrupted my thoughts. 3 sharp knocks. I opened the door. Ethan stood there in an expensive suit, smiling as though nothing had happened. I knew you'd calm down. I haven't. He laughed. Come on. You know Grandpa overreacts. You voted. So, you wanted my position. I earned it. His confidence didn't reach his eyes. He looked past me into the apartment. No boxes packed. I live here. I thought you'd leave the city. I won't. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face. Interesting. You know, he continued casually, there's a supplier issue in Singapore. I remained silent. And customs delayed 2 container ships. Still silent. He frowned. The procurement team can't locate the insurance documents. I simply looked at him. Finally, he sighed. Fine. Stop pretending. I'm not pretending. The company needs your notes. They're in the company database. Some aren't. I know. His jaw tightened. You did that deliberately. No. I simply stopped carrying everything myself. For years, I had solved problems without recording every shortcut, every personal relationship, every emergency workaround. Not to create dependence. Simply because there had never been time. Now, the company was discovering how much knowledge had existed only inside my head. Ethan's confident posture slowly weakened. Help us this once. I remember my father's letter. Never seek revenge. Simply stop saving them. I resigned. You were fired. Even better. He stared. You're really going to watch us struggle? I've done enough watching. I gently closed the door. He knocked again. Harder. Adrian. No answer. Don't be childish. Silence. Eventually his footsteps faded. For the first time in years, I chose not to rescue anyone. The following morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Missed calls. Former colleagues. Department heads. Unknown numbers. I ignored everyone. Instead, I drove to Ashton Trust Bank. Vault 317 waited beneath layers of steel doors. The elderly vault manager checked the brass key and quietly unlocked a private room. Inside waited a single fireproof document case. Nothing more. I opened it carefully. Photographs. Shipping manifests. Insurance records. Audio recordings. Copies of internal emails. And one thick investigation file. Across the front someone had written in red ink. The Hawthorne accident was not an accident. My vision blurred. I opened the first page. The signatures belonged to men I had trusted my entire life. The final document was a sworn statement from Eleanor Grant. She had tried to report financial fraud years earlier. The investigation had disappeared. My father's death had closed every loose end. Outside the private room, my phone rang again. This time, it was the chairman himself. I watched the screen until it stopped. Seconds later, another message arrived. Emergency board meeting. Return immediately. The company is under government investigation. I slowly locked the document case. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. For 11 years, I would have run back without hesitation. This time, I remained seated. And somewhere across the city, the first cracks in the empire they believed was untouchable had already begun to spread. The television above the cafe counter switched from sports highlights to breaking business news. The anchor's composed expression sharpened as a red banner crawled across the screen. Hawthorne Logistics under regulatory review. I stirred my untouched coffee. Around me, strangers leaned closer to the television. Government investigators entered company headquarters this morning following allegations concerning customs declarations and offshore financial reporting. No one in the cafe knew I'd spent more than a decade inside those walls. No one knew the company had been held together by invisible threads. And no one knew I had finally let go. My phone buzzed again. Rachel. Adrian, please answer. Rachel Bennett, Chief Financial Officer. One of the few executives who had never treated employees like disposable tools. I let the call ring out. Seconds later, another message appeared. This isn't about your job anymore. They're searching every department. Ethan is making everything worse. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Across the room, two businessmen discussed the news. They expanded too fast. No, somebody important must have turned on them. If that's true, investors will panic. I quietly paid my bill and left before the conversation reached my ears again. The lobby of Ashton Trust Bank was nearly empty. Eleanor Grant was already waiting. She looked at the document case in my hand. You opened it. I did. And my father knew. He suspected. He documented everything. She nodded. He believed facts survive longer than people. We entered a private conference room. The walls muted every sound from outside. I laid the files across the polished table. Photographs, invoices, wire transfers, minutes from board meetings. Every document fit together with terrifying precision. They manipulated shipping insurance, I said quietly. Yes. They created shell companies. Yes. They blamed my father. They needed someone who couldn't defend himself. My throat tightened. He discovered the fraud. He refused to sign the false declarations. I looked at Eleanor. You testified. I tried. What happened? They threatened everyone involved. She folded her hands. Back then, Hawthorne Logistics employed nearly 30,000 people. Regulators feared the company collapsing overnight. So they buried it. They postponed justice. Silence settled between us. Finally, she pushed another folder toward me. I've kept one copy for 14 years. Inside was a resignation letter. Not mine. My father's. Dated 3 days before his death. He had planned to leave. He had intended to expose everything. Instead, his cargo vessel exploded. I closed my eyes. For years, I had believed loyalty honored his memory. Instead, I had spent 11 years protecting the very people who had erased him. Eleanor watched me carefully. What will you do? I won't destroy them. No, I'll stop protecting them. A faint smile crossed her face. Your father would approve. By afternoon, Hawthorne headquarters resembled a city under siege. Reporters crowded the entrance. Employees whispered in anxious groups. Government vehicles lined the curb. I stood across the street, unnoticed beneath the shade of a bookstore awning. Not hiding, simply observing. Rachel hurried outside with a stack of files pressed against her chest. She nearly collided with me. Her eyes widened. Adrian, you look exhausted. I haven't slept. I can see that. She glanced toward the reporters before lowering her voice. They're asking about contracts only you understood. I don't work there. I know. They fired me. I know. She laughed bitterly. They're acting like they expected you to rescue them anyway. I said nothing. She looked at me for several long seconds. You're really done? I am. A strange mixture of relief and sadness appeared on her face. I used to think staying was the noble choice. And now, I think we confused sacrifice with responsibility. She nodded slowly. Ethan's changing records. What? He ordered accounting to replace archived financial files. I felt my expression harden. He said investigators wouldn't notice. They will. I told him that. And He called me disloyal. The irony almost made me smile. Rachel hesitated. I found something. She handed me a flash drive. I copied it before anyone could erase it. What is it? Internal surveillance archives. Why give it to me? Because if I hand it to the board, they'll destroy it. She nodded. And if I give it directly to investigators, they'll ask how I obtained it. I accepted the drive. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She looked back toward headquarters. I don't think this is the biggest secret. That evening I sat alone in my apartment, the flash drive connected to my laptop. Hundreds of security recordings filled the screen. Loading, loading, loading. Then one file caught my attention. Warehouse 7. 14 years earlier. The date matched the week of my father's death. The footage was grainy. A younger version of my father entered the warehouse, carrying a thick folder. Minutes later, 3 men followed. The camera had no audio, only images. One man blocked the exit. Another pointed aggressively toward the documents. My father refused to hand them over. The argument escalated. Then, the recording froze. Corrupted. I frowned. The timestamp skipped ahead by 27 minutes. When the picture returned, the warehouse was empty. Someone had deliberately removed almost half an hour. I leaned back. Not enough to prove murder. Enough to prove someone had hidden something. The doorbell rang. Twice. Firm. Measured. Not impatient. I opened the door. A middle-aged man in a dark overcoat stood outside. I apologized for arriving without notice. I don't believe we've met. My name is Victor Hale. The name sounded familiar. I'm at the National Commercial Integrity Bureau. Government. He held up his identification. We've been trying to reach you. I noticed. May I come in? After a brief pause, I stepped aside. Victor looked around the apartment before taking a seat. His eyes immediately settled on the folders spread across my dining table. So, you already know. I suspected. He folded his hands. For 14 years, we've investigated pieces of this case. And someone always stayed one step ahead. You think that's changed? I think, he replied carefully, someone stopped cleaning up their mistakes. The sentence lingered. I understood exactly what he meant. For years, I had unknowingly corrected discrepancies before auditors ever saw them. Not because I was hiding crimes, because I believed I was protecting the company. Every missing shipment, every accounting inconsistency, every suspicious payment. I found explanations, negotiated settlements, solved problems. Without realizing, I had also erased the visible consequences of someone else's corruption. Victor slid a sealed envelope across the table. We recovered this from an abandoned storage unit yesterday. Inside was a photograph. I stared at it in disbelief. My father, standing beside Chairman Leonard Hawthorne, both smiling, both shaking hands. On the back, handwritten in fading ink. If anything happens to me, Leonard already knows why. I slowly looked up. The chairman knew everything. Victor's expression remained unreadable. We believe he knew much more than he admitted. Silence settled over the room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Victor finally stood. We're not asking you to testify. Why? Not yet. What are you asking? He met my eyes. Do nothing. I almost laughed. That's exactly what I've been doing. No. His voice was calm. Keep doing nothing. He glanced once more toward the evidence covering the table. The people who buried the truth have spent years believing you would always protect them. He walked toward the door. They're making mistakes now. After he left, I stood by the window overlooking the rain-soaked streets. Across the city, lights still burned inside Hawthorne headquarters. Executives were undoubtedly scrambling, deleting files, calling lawyers, searching for solutions. For the first time in 11 years, none of those solutions would come from me. And somewhere inside that desperate scramble, someone would inevitably make the one mistake that finally exposed everything. The rain had stopped by dawn. Sunlight reflected off the glass towers downtown, making the city appear cleaner than it truly was. My phone remained silent for almost an hour. That alone told me Hawthorne Logistics was in deeper trouble than ever before. Then the silence shattered. Rachel called. I answered. Adrian. Her voice was strained. They've suspended Ethan. I remained quiet. They found unauthorized changes in the accounting system. I expected that. You expected it? He panicked, so he tried to erase evidence. People who panic rarely delete the right files. Rachel exhaled slowly. You really aren't surprised by anything anymore. No. A pause followed. Grandfather wants to see you. I won't. He said it's about your father. My grip tightened around the phone. I'll think about it. He doesn't have much time. The line went dead. By noon, reporters had doubled outside company headquarters. Employees exited carrying personal belongings. Some looked angry. Others simply looked defeated. No one celebrated. A collapsing company wasn't just a headline. It meant thousands of ordinary workers wondering how they would pay rent next month. That thought stayed with me. The executives deserved the consequences of their choices. The warehouse workers did not. As I watched from across the street, someone approached. Mr. Shaw? I turned. A man in his 60s stood beside me, wearing faded work clothes. His hands were scarred from decades of manual labor. I worked Dock 3, he said. I know. His eyes widened. You remember me? You trained every new supervisor yourself. A small smile appeared. Didn't think anyone upstairs noticed. I noticed. He hesitated. They're saying you abandoned us. I left. They say it's the same thing. I looked toward the headquarters. What do you think? The old dock worker followed my gaze. I think. He chose his words carefully. Every time management made stupid decisions, somehow they became your responsibility. He chuckled softly. People got used to miracles. I said nothing. He extended a weathered envelope. My retirement papers. I frowned. Why are you showing me these? Not the papers. Inside was a faded photograph. A company picnic. 14 years earlier. My father stood beside dozens of dock workers, laughing. One face in the background immediately caught my attention. Chairman Leonard Hawthorne, arguing with a man I didn't recognize. Who is that? The old worker leaned closer. Harold Briggs. I've never heard the name. You wouldn't. He disappeared after your father's accident. My heartbeat slowed. Disappeared. Quit overnight. What did he do? He inspected cargo safety. The realization settled heavily. A safety inspector. Someone who could identify sabotage. The dock worker lowered his voice. I always wondered why no one asked him questions. That afternoon, Victor Hale met me in a quiet public library instead of his office. He examined the photograph carefully. Harold Briggs. You know him. We've searched for him for years. He inspected the vessel. Victor nodded and vanished 3 days later. Can you find him? We've tried. I slid the photograph across the table. Try again. Victor studied me. Why now? Because someone kept him hidden. And they're losing control. Victor smiled faintly. Pressure makes secrets move. He stood. I'll reopen every lead. Before leaving, he stopped. One more thing. The chairman requested immunity negotiations. That surprised even me. So quickly. He claims he can identify everyone responsible. I stared through the library window. The man who had protected the family name above all else was suddenly willing to expose it. Fear had finally outweighed loyalty. 2 days later, I entered Hawthorne Manor for the first time since my dismissal. The estate looked unchanged. Perfect lawns, marble fountains, towering oak trees. Yet the silence felt unnatural. No gardeners, no staff chatting in the hallways. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath. A maid escorted me to the chairman's study. Leonard Hawthorne looked 20 years older than when I had last seen him. His shoulders had collapsed inward. His hands trembled slightly as he poured tea. You came. You said it concerned my father. It does. I remained standing. He gestured toward a chair. I'd rather stand. A painful smile crossed his face. You've become very much like him. I always was. He lowered his eyes. For years I convinced myself I was protecting everyone. Were you? No. The admission came so quietly I almost missed it. I was protecting myself. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, he opened an old wooden drawer. Inside rested a cassette tape. I've kept this hidden for 14 years. He placed it on the desk between us. What is it? A recording of the meeting your father attended before he died. Every muscle in my body tensed. You were there. Yes. You watched. I did. You said nothing. His face tightened. I believed they would only threaten him. And afterward, I told myself the explosion wasn't connected. You lied to yourself. Yes. Silence swallowed the room. Then he whispered, I've been lying ever since. I picked up the cassette. Why give this to me now? Because they're preparing to blame everything on Ethan. I frowned. Ethan wasn't even involved 14 years ago. I know. They're sacrificing him. They've always sacrificed someone. The words echoed through the study. My father. Now Ethan. Different generations. The same pattern. Leonard slowly stood. I won't let them bury another truth. Before I could answer, shouting erupted downstairs. A door slammed. Footsteps thundered through the hallway. The study doors burst open. Ethan stormed inside, his face pale with fury. You, he pointed directly at me. You've been meeting investigators. I have. You betrayed this family. I looked at him calmly. No, I stopped protecting it. His breathing became uneven. You think you're innocent? I never claimed that. If you'd helped us. I did. For 11 years. His voice cracked. You were supposed to keep doing it. The room fell silent. Even Ethan seemed stunned by what he had just admitted. He hadn't wanted justice. He hadn't wanted truth. He had simply expected me to continue carrying the consequences of everyone else's decisions. Leonard closed his eyes. So that's what we've become. Ethan looked between us, realizing too late that the words could never be taken back. Outside, police sirens echoed through the estate grounds. Victor Hale stepped through the still-open doorway, with 2 investigators behind him. His gaze settled on the cassette in my hand. We'll need that as evidence. Leonard nodded weakly. I know. Victor then looked at Ethan. And we'll need you to come with us for questioning. Ethan's confident expression finally shattered. For the first time in his life, there was no one left willing to save him. The flashing blue lights painted the walls of Hawthorne Manor in restless streaks. No one spoke as Victor Hale accepted the cassette from my hands. An evidence technician sealed it inside a transparent bag, labeled it, and carried it away with the same care one would give a human heart. Ethan stared at the bag. You can't use that. Victor looked at him calmly. We'll determine that. It proves nothing. Perhaps. Victor's voice remained even. Or perhaps it explains 14 years of unanswered questions. Ethan took a step backward. I want my lawyer. You'll have one. The investigators escorted him from the study. He turned once before disappearing into the hallway. His eyes met mine. Hatred, confusion, fear. More than anything, fear. The door closed behind him. Only Leonard and I remained. He lowered himself into his chair as though the years had suddenly become unbearable. I should have told you after the funeral. Yes. I convinced myself I was protecting the company. You were protecting your position. He didn't argue. I know. He looked toward the empty doorway. I raised my grandchildren to believe reputation mattered more than integrity. I answered quietly. And now reputation is all that's left. 3 days later, the Commercial Integrity Bureau requested my presence. Not as a suspect, as a witness. The interview room was plain. A metal table, 3 chairs, a recording device. Victor placed the cassette player between us. We've restored the damaged sections. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Then voices. My father's voice was unmistakable. I won't sign false declarations. Another man answered. You don't have a choice. I always have a choice. A third voice joined them. If my memory hadn't recognized it instantly, I would have refused to believe it. Leonard, Daniel, think carefully. My father's tone softened. So you know, silence. Then Leonard whispered, I know, and you're saying nothing. I can't destroy the company. The company isn't worth innocent lives. Another voice interrupted angrily. Enough. Papers scattered. A chair overturned. My father's breathing became heavier. If anything happens to me, he never finished the sentence. The recording erupted into shouting. Then, the tape clicked. Victor stopped it. The remaining portion is too damaged. I sat motionless. For years, I had imagined that conversation. The truth was worse. Leonard hadn't ordered my father's death. He had simply chosen silence when silence became convenient. Sometimes cowardice leaves wounds as deep as cruelty. Victor folded his hands. The recording corroborates financial evidence. So what happens now? We continue. He hesitated. There is something else. He slid a folder across the table. A witness statement. Signed yesterday. Harold Briggs. They had found him. He had been living under another name in a coastal town hundreds of miles away. His testimony described safety inspections deliberately ignored before the explosion. He named executives. He named shell companies. He described bribes. He described threats. He described the meeting that changed everything. When I reached the final page, one sentence caught my eye. Daniel Shaw warned me to protect the evidence because he believed his own family would become targets. I closed the folder slowly. Even at the end, my father had worried more about others than himself. That afternoon, Hawthorne Logistics issued an emergency press conference. Reporters filled every seat. Cameras lined the walls. I watched from the back beside Victor. Rachel stood near the stage, no longer wearing the confidence of a corporate executive. Only exhaustion remained. The company's spokesperson approached the podium. He unfolded a prepared statement. His hands shook. Following recent investigations, questions exploded before he could continue. Did executives conceal evidence? Who authorized offshore accounts? Is the chairman resigning? Was the shipping accident 14 years ago connected? The room descended into chaos. Then Leonard walked onto the stage. No announcement. No introduction. Just slow, deliberate steps. The crowd fell silent. He adjusted the microphone. I will answer. No one interrupted him. For the first time in decades, Leonard Hawthorne spoke without lawyers whispering into his ear. I failed. His voice echoed through the conference hall. I failed as chairman. I failed as guardian of this company. And I failed the family of Daniel Shaw. Every camera focused on him. He continued. I was not the man who planned his death. A murmur spread through the audience. But I knew enough to stop what came afterward. His shoulders sank. I chose silence. Questions erupted again. He raised a trembling hand. No more excuses. He began naming names. Former directors, financial officers, outside contractors, consultants. Each confession peeled another layer away from the image Hawthorne Logistics had spent decades building. By the end of the statement, the empire looked less like a respected corporation and more like a monument constructed on fear and compromise. When Leonard stepped away from the podium, no one applauded. No one shouted. The silence carried far more weight. Over the next several weeks, arrests followed one after another. Some executives attempted to flee the country. Others accepted plea agreements. Hidden bank accounts surfaced. Insurance fraud unraveled. International investigators joined the case. The corruption had reached farther than anyone imagined. Yet one thing surprised the public. I remained absent. Television commentators speculated endlessly. Will Adrian Shaw return? Will he reclaim leadership? Will he sue the company? Will he become chairman? I answered none of them. One evening, Rachel visited my apartment. She carried a thin folder. The board voted today. I heard. They want you back. As what? Chief Executive Officer. I smiled faintly. They've learned nothing. Rachel looked confused. They trust you. They need someone to repair the damage. Isn't that what you've always done? I looked out the window. The city lights shimmered beneath the evening sky. For years, I believed my value came from fixing broken systems. And now, I realized some systems deserve to collapse. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I thought you'd say that. She handed me the folder anyway. Inside was the official offer. Unlimited authority, equity, control, everything I had once worked toward. I closed it without signing. I won't return. She smiled. I wasn't disappointed. No, I was relieved. Why? Because if you'd gone back, she laughed softly, they would have started depending on you all over again. I couldn't argue. She was right. Some patterns only end when someone refuses to continue them. The final hearing before formal indictments took place on a gray autumn morning. Families of former employees filled the gallery. Journalists crowded every available seat. Harold Briggs testified first, then forensic accountants, then investigators. Finally, Leonard Hawthorne stood. He answered every question without resistance. Near the end of the hearing, the prosecutor asked one final question. Why confess now? Leonard looked across the courtroom. His eyes found mine. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he answered quietly, because the one man I expected to save us. His voice faltered, finally walked away. The courtroom remained silent. Not because the statement excused anyone. It didn't. It simply exposed the truth beneath every scandal. The company had never been held together by honesty. It had survived because one person kept carrying burdens that were never his. The moment he stopped, the truth no longer had anywhere to hide. Winter arrived quietly. The headlines faded before the snow did. The media found newer scandals. Different corporations. Different executives. Different disasters. For the first time in years, my mornings belonged to no one but myself. I no longer woke to ringing phones or urgent emails demanding impossible decisions before sunrise. Instead, I walked. The city looked different when I wasn't rushing through it. Small cafes opened before dawn. Street vendors greeted familiar customers by name. Children hurried toward school, laughing without concern for stock prices or board meetings. Life had continued while I had buried myself inside conference rooms. I had simply forgotten to notice. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside Dock 3. The cranes still towered over the harbor. Containers still moved in careful rhythm. Salt filled the air. A familiar voice called out, "Mr. Shaw." I turned. The old dock worker who had given me the photograph months earlier walked toward me with the same steady stride. "I heard you refused the chairman's position." "I did." He laughed. "Good. You don't sound surprised. I've worked here 42 years. He leaned against the railing, overlooking the water. "I've seen plenty of bosses, and they all wanted power." He smiled. "You only ever wanted people to go home safely." His words stayed with me longer than he realized. For years, I had measured my worth by profits, growth charts, and crisis reports. Yet the people who remembered me most weren't investors. They were mechanics, forklift operators, security guards, dispatchers, the people whose names never appeared in annual reports. Perhaps I've been chasing the wrong victories all along. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Rachel stepped out carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "I guessed I'd find you near the docks." "You guessed correctly." She handed me one. "No sugar." "You remembered." "I remember more than you think." We stood in silence, watching a cargo ship disappear toward the horizon. Finally, she spoke. I resigned. I looked at her. "When?" "This morning." "The board accepted?" "They didn't have much choice." "What will you do now?" She laughed. "I have absolutely no idea." "That sounds terrifying." "It does. And freeing." She nodded. "I've spent 20 years cleaning up after executives." She looked at me sideways. "I suppose I learned that from you." "I hope not." "Why?" "Because it almost destroyed me." Rachel took a slow sip of coffee. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous." She smiled. "It usually is." She reached into her bag and unfolded several documents. Business plans, financial projections, property maps. I raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" "A logistics consulting firm." "You want to start over?" "I want to build something." She hesitated. "Not something enormous. Something honest." I studied the proposal. Small businesses, independent shipping companies, supply chain safety, compliance consulting, no hidden offshore accounts, no impossible expansion targets, no family politics, just practical work. She watched my expression carefully. "I'm not asking today." "I know. I just wanted you to see it." I folded the papers carefully. "I'll think about it." She smiled. "That's all I hoped for." That evening I visited my father's grave. Fresh snow covered the ground. The cemetery was almost empty. I brushed the snow from the headstone before placing a small lantern beside it. For several minutes, I said nothing. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. Eventually I spoke anyway. "I thought protecting them honored you." The cold wind answered first. I was wrong. I smiled faintly. "You already knew that." I remembered his letter. "Never seek revenge. Simply stop saving those who bury the truth." At the time, I had thought those words impossible. Now I understood. He hadn't wanted me to become bitter. He had wanted me to become free. Spring arrived with unexpected opportunities. Rachel's proposal became more than paper. We rented a modest office overlooking the river. 3 desks, 1 meeting room, a coffee machine that worked only when it wanted to. There were no marble floors, no executive dining rooms, no private elevators. It felt strangely perfect. Our first client was a family-owned shipping company that had nearly gone bankrupt after years of poor management advice. The owner, Mrs. Alvarez, greeted us personally. I've spoken to 5 consulting firms. And I asked. They all wanted to sell expensive software. Rachel smiled. We're here to understand your business first. For the next 6 hours, we walked through warehouses instead of boardrooms. We spoke with warehouse supervisors instead of shareholders. We inspected loading procedures ourselves. When we finished, Mrs. Alvarez looked genuinely surprised. No consultants have ever spent this much time on site. They should. She extended her hand. I'd like to hire you. As we drove back to the office, Rachel laughed. What? We just landed our first client. We did, and we earned it without pretending to be geniuses. That's refreshing. She nodded. It really is. Months passed. 1 client became 3. 3 became 12. Our reputation spread quietly. Not because of aggressive marketing, because companies trusted us. We solved problems before they became scandals. We trained managers to recognize warning signs. We refused contracts that required dishonest reporting. More than once, potential clients walked away after hearing that. Neither of us regretted it. Some business simply wasn't worth winning. One rainy afternoon, Victor Hale visited our office. He looked around with mild amusement. This is smaller than I expected. It costs less to heat. He laughed. I suppose that's true. Rachel brought coffee before excusing herself. Victor placed a thick envelope on my desk. The final court decisions. I opened it. The principal executives received lengthy prison sentences. Several international partners were permanently barred from corporate leadership. Assets obtained through fraud were seized. Compensation funds had been established for affected employees and families. Near the end of the report, one paragraph caught my attention. The court recognizes Daniel Shaw's documented efforts to prevent the fraudulent activities that ultimately led to his death. His professional reputation is hereby fully restored. I read the sentence twice, then quietly closed the file. Victor noticed. I thought you'd smile. I wanted this for him. And I wish he were alive to read it. Victor nodded. So do I. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. The former Hawthorne headquarters has been sold. To whom? A public maritime training institute. I looked out the office window toward the river. Students would soon walk hallways once occupied by people obsessed with appearances and control. Perhaps that was the most fitting ending the building could have received. Some places deserved a second purpose. Not because the past was erased, but because the future no longer belonged to it. A full year passed before I set foot inside the old Hawthorne headquarters again. The bronze company logo had been removed. The marble lobby remained, but the portraits of former chairmen were gone. Construction workers moved through the building, replacing executive offices with classrooms and simulation labs. The scent of fresh paint had replaced the stale perfume of corporate prestige. I stood in the center of the lobby. This place had once felt like the center of my entire world. Now it was simply another building. Strange feeling, isn't it? I turned. Victor Hale walked toward me, carrying a hard hat. I thought investigators preferred courtrooms. I've had enough courtrooms. He handed me the helmet. They're giving visitors a tour. We followed a guide through corridors that had once been filled with whispered meetings and political games. The old boardroom stopped me in my tracks. The long mahogany table was gone. In its place stood rows of training desks. Digital screens covered the walls. A plaque hung beside the entrance. Maritime Ethics and Leadership Center. I read the words twice. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Victor smiled faintly. Fitting, don't you think? It is. Young students entered the room carrying notebooks. Some laughed. Some argued over assignments. None of them knew the history of the place. That was probably for the best. They deserved to build something without inheriting someone else's guilt. After the tour ended, I walked alone toward the rooftop terrace. The city stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sky. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Still thinking too much. Rachel stepped onto the terrace, holding 2 paper cups. You've made this a habit. So have you. She handed me one. I heard the Institute invited you to lecture. They did. And I accepted. She smiled. I'm not surprised. I almost declined. Why didn't you? I looked over the harbor. Because someone should tell them that success without integrity eventually destroys itself. Rachel nodded. And because your father would have. The breeze carried the smell of the sea across the rooftop. For a while, neither of us spoke. Some silences no longer needed filling. A week later, I stood before a classroom of future logistics managers. No reporters, no shareholders, no board members, just students. One young man raised his hand before I had even finished introducing the topic. Mr. Shaw. Yes. Is it true you could have taken back the company? Yes. Why didn't you? The room became completely quiet. I considered the question carefully. Because rebuilding the same cage doesn't make it freedom. Several students exchanged thoughtful glances. Another asked, Didn't you want revenge? I smiled. I wanted peace. And weren't you angry? I was. What changed? I looked through the classroom windows toward the harbor. I realized anger keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. The room remained silent. So I stopped carrying them. No dramatic applause followed. Only thoughtful faces. That was enough. Summer returned to the city exactly as it always had. Ships entered the harbor. Businesses opened. Families gathered in parks. Life moved forward without asking anyone's permission. Our consulting firm had grown steadily, but never beyond what we could manage honestly. Whenever a client requested shortcuts or questionable accounting practices, we politely declined. Some competitors laughed at us. Others called us naive. Years earlier, those opinions would have unsettled me. Now, they meant very little. One Friday afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Leonard Hawthorne, older, frielier, walking with a cane. Rachel quietly left us alone. He stood in the doorway for several seconds before speaking. I wasn't sure you'd see me. I wasn't sure either. He nodded. I won't stay long. I offered him a chair. He sat with visible effort. I've been released on medical parole. I heard. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. He looked around the modest office. It's smaller than your old office. It is. You seem happier. I am. A long silence settled between us. Finally, he reached into his coat and placed a worn leather notebook on my desk. I found this among your father's belongings. I opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten notes. Ideas for safer shipping procedures. Training methods. Sketches for employee education programs. On the final page, a single sentence was written in careful handwriting. A company should never need one person to save it. Build people, not dependents. I stared at the words. Everything suddenly made sense. For years, I had believed being indispensable was a compliment. My father had believed the opposite. A healthy organization never relied on a single hero. It created systems where ordinary people could succeed together. Leonard slowly stood. I spent 14 years misunderstanding him. So did I. He looked toward the door. I hope you'll remember him for who he was. I already do. He gave a small nod and quietly left. I never saw him again. That evening, Rachel found me sitting alone in the office. You've been reading that notebook for hours. I know. She looked at the final page. He was wise. He was. She smiled. So, what now? I closed the notebook gently. Tomorrow we help another client. And after that, we help the next one. No grand empire? No. No billion-dollar expansion. I laughed softly. I've already lived inside one. She laughed with me. Fair enough. Outside, the sun dipped below the harbor, painting the water in gold. For years, I had believed my story ended the day I walked away. I had been wrong. Walking away hadn't been the ending. It had been the first honest decision of my adult life. The people who buried the truth had eventually been crushed beneath its weight. Not because I hunted them, not because I sought revenge, but because I finally stopped carrying the consequences of choices that were never mine. As the office lights dimmed and the city settled into another ordinary evening, I realized something my father had understood long before I did. The greatest victory is not watching those who wronged you fall. It is discovering that when they finally do, you no longer need to look back.